So in last week's Torah portion, which was Vayishlach, we had this fantastic story of Yaakov, of Jacob, and he's going to find a wife, and immediately he meets Rachel, and he ends up marrying the love of his life. But together with that, if we go back to last week's story, he got 3 more women all together with that. He got Rachel's sister Leah and both of their 2 maids, and he ended up having children, which made up the 12 tribes of Israel from all of the children from these 4 women. So after he had worked many years for his father-in-law Lavan, then the Lord said to him to go back to the land of his fathers, and that's where we come to today. Today, this Torah portion is Vayishlach, and it's Genesis 32:4 through 36:43, and the Haftarah is Obadiah 1, verses 1 through 21, and the New Covenant portion is Matthew 26:36 through 46. So, we know that now Jacob is on his way back, just like God told him to go. And in chapter 32 of Genesis, starting in verse 3, then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. So we know, why did Yaakov leave his mother and father in the first place? It's because he had been deceitful toward his brother Esav, and he had taken the birthright, and Esav had decided in his heart he was going to kill him just as soon as he could. So that was when Yaakov left. Now, many years later, after Yaakov has got these wives and children, and God tells him, go back to the land of your father, and now he knows he is going to have to meet his brother Esav. So he sent those messengers out to his brother, and in verse 6 it says, the messengers returned to Yaakov saying, we came to your brother Esav, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So now, like you can imagine, Jacob had cheated his brother, and now his brother is coming to him with 400 men. We know Jacob was struck with fear, and it says in verse 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and the camels into 2 companies. And that goes back to the name of the camp that we finished with last year. He called that place Machanaim, 2 camps. And in verse 8, for he said, if Esav comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. And in verse 9, Yaakov said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. Wow, we see that through all these years of hardship, Yaakov has been changing, and he's becoming a humble person. He says to God, I am unworthy. Then he says, for with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav, for I fear him that he will come and attack me and the mothers and the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. And he spent the night there. So anyway, we go on, and he prepares a wonderful present to be sent to Esav. And he tells his servants, after this manner you shall speak to Esav when you find him, and you shall say, behold, your servant Yaakov also is behind us. Once again, he's calling himself, he's saying to Esav, I am your servant. He's humbling himself. Going on, for he says, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and then afterwards I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp. Now, it was a huge gift of animals and livestock that he sent to his brother Esav. If we look in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 16, we see the wisdom of this, because it says, a man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. And sometimes giving a gift to someone who is upset with us is a way to make an opening to have our relationship restored with them. Okay, going on, in verse 24, that night, Yaakov was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Yaakov's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Yaakov said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Yaakov." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Yaakov, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Now, who else did God change his name? We know that God changed his grandfather's name. He made Avram, he made his name Avraham, and now here he is with Yaakov, and he's changing his name from Yaakov, like one who was deceitful and hanging on to the heel of his brother, to Israel, one who has striven with God. But he said, and then in verse 29, Yaakov asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Yaakov named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Going on into chapter 33 of Genesis, then Yaakov lifted his eyes and looked. Behold, Esav was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them, and he bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Once again, here he is humbling himself before his brother. And then Esav ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And so many times I wonder, is this a picture of what's going to happen in the future? What we have is the Yaakov. This is the grandson of Abraham. It's the son of Isaac, and this is the Jewish people. And on this hand, we have Esav coming, from which came many of the Arab people. And what we see here is a reconciliation, a divine reconciliation between the two, which I also think that we see in Isaiah chapter 19. Going on, let's look at still in Genesis 33, looking at verse 10. Yaakov said, "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, take this present from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably." So Esav said to him, "Listen, let me go, you come with me, let's go on together." And Yaakov says, "I can't go as fast as you. I've got mothers and little children with me. I need to go slower." So the two parted ways amiably. And if we go on in verse 17 of chapter 33, Yaakov journeyed to Sukkot. And in verse 18, Yaakov came safely to the city of Shechem. And then in verse 20, and there he erected an altar, and he called it El Elohei Israel, God, the God of Israel. Now, when we get to chapter 34, this is just one of the saddest stories in the Bible, because we also know that Yaakov had a daughter named Dinah. And there, when they get to Shechem, he fell in love. He saw Dinah, and he fell in love with Dinah. Shechem was the son of Hamor, and these were the people of that area where Yaakov was. And he took her. Shechem took Dinah by force. And when the brothers of Dinah heard this, obviously they were so angry and upset. But Shechem loved her. He had fallen in love with her, and he said to his father, "Get me Dinah as my wife." And so the family of Hamor, they go and they talk, and they say, this is what they say in chapter 34 4, I'll start at verse 8. Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. And thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it." Then if we go down to verse 13, but Yaakov's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. So basically what they said was, we can't intermarry with you unless all of you are circumcised. And because Shechem loved her so much, he convinced all the men, yes, let's do it. And so they agreed to it. All the men there, Shechem, Hamor, all of them were circumcised. And then what happens in verse 25? Now it came about on the third day after they had been circumcised, when they were in pain, still in pain, that two of Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unaware, and they killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. Yaakov's sons came upon the slain, and they looted the city because they had defiled their sister. What a sad, sad story. We go on down into chapter 35. Then God said to Yaakov, "Arise, go up to Bethel and live there, and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esav." And in verse 6, so Yaakov came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him, and he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, the God of Bethel, of the house of God, because there God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. In verse 9, then God appeared to Yaakov again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, Your name is Yaakov. You shall no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel shall be your name. And thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you. Here's again the promise that this land would belong to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov and their descendants. I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. Looking at verse 16, then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go from Ephrat, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. You remember we talked a little bit about this last week. So here is Rachel, pregnant, getting ready to have her next son after Yosef, and she started giving birth. And it says in verse 17, when she was in severe labor, the midwife said, "Don't fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. And Yaakov set up a pillar over her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. And of course, you can still go to her grave. And in verse 27 of chapter 35, Yaakov continues on, and he came to his father Isaac at Mamre of Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esav and Yaakov buried him. So the ending of this story really is very sweet, that after all of this conflict for so many years, at the end, his two sons together, Isaac's two sons, Esav and Yaakov, they come together at the death of their father. And once again, that beautiful phrase, he was gathered to his people, meaning that when we die, we don't just become dust. we are gathered to our people. If we are in the Lord, we go home to our Father and to be gathered to those who went before us. The last chapter in this parasha really just talks about the generations of Esav, and then that leads us into next week's portion. I bless you today, and I hope that you are just being showered with the love and the presence of God. Shalom.